everybody. Welcome to John Jay. I'm Allison Pease. I'm the interim provost here, and it is just a delight to introduce this truly exciting talk tonight, and really a wonderful group of guest panelists as well. On behalf of everybody from outside of John Jay, I do want to say welcome to John Jay. John Jay's motto is educating for justice. And because we are a college with criminal justice in our title, people don't often associate us as having an art program, an art gallery, or, as we see tonight, world-class art scholars. There's no justice without art. And so tonight is really kind of a testament to that. Art is empathy, it's imagination, it's expression, and without those things, you cannot have justice. So I am particularly excited to introduce my colleague, the great Dr. Claudia Calirman, who will be talking about her book. And so let me just give you her biography so we know who we're listening to. Claudia Calirman is Associate Professor of Art History at John Jay and the Chair of the Department of Art and Music. Her areas of expertise are Latin American modern and contemporary art. Her first book, Brazilian Art Under Dictatorship, Antonio Manuel, Artur Barrio, and Childo Mireles, was published by Duke University Press in 2012. This book analyzed the intersection of politics and the visual arts during the most repressive years of Brazil's military regime from 1968 until 1975. The book received the 2013 RV Award by the Association for Latin American Art. Tonight, we are privileged to hear about her second book, also published with Duke University Press this year. It's called Dissident Practices, Brazilian Women Artists, 1960s to 2020. Dissident Practices highlights works by prominent and emerging women artists from the 1960s to the 2020s, women who were lauded as key figures in Brazilian art but faced adversity and constraints because of their gender. This book gives nuanced account to how they responded to authoritarianism, engaged with trauma in the aftermath of the military dictatorship, interrogated social gender norms, and fought against women's objectification. I am very proud to present to you Claudia Calirman.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Allison, thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I would like to introduce our panel tonight. Before I'm going to do my thank you. So I'd like to also to thank the staff of the Office of Advancement of Research, OAR, here at John Jay College for their wonderful support for this panel, especially Dan Stageman and Remy Bahati, who really planned the logistics for this evening. Also, of course, I'd like to thank the speakers, Vivian Crockett and André Lepecki. Unfortunately, Julia Breyer-Wilson got sick today, so she cannot be here, but I have a good surprise for you. 3 of the artists from the book and the exhibition are here, and they are going to join us at the end of the panel for the Q&A, so that would be great. So I'm going to introduce my colleagues, and I'm so honored, really, that they are here. Vivian Crockett is a curator of the New Museum and scholar focused on modern and contemporary art of African diasporas, Latinx, and Americas as the intersections of race, gender, and queer theory. Vivian is a PhD candidate in art history at Columbia University, and she's the curator of the current acclaimed exhibition, Wangeti Mutu Intertwined, at the New Museum. If you haven't been there, you should definitely run to see. It's a fabulous, fabulous show. And is also the co-curator of the next triennial at the New Museum. So welcome,
Isabella
Vivian.
Michele, who's here.
Yay, with Isabella from the Museu de Arte de São Paulo, who is here, especially for tonight, I hope. No. Thank you, Isabella, for coming. And André Lepecki is full professor and is the chair of the Department of Studies at New York University. He is the editor of several anthologies on dance and performance theory. He has curated acclaimed festivals and projects internationally in Berlin, Warsaw, New York, London, Munich, Sydney, among many, many other places. He's the author of Exhausting Dance, Performance and the Politics of Movement from 2006, which is published in 13 languages, and of Singularities, Dance in the Age of Performance, 2016. He has received many, many awards for his curatorial and editorial works, and if I was to be saying all of them, we'll be here the whole night, so I'm going to skip them. Vivian's going to talk, and then André is going to talk, and after that, we're going to have a conversation among us, and then we're going to open to the public, to the audience, and I'm going to invite the audience to come to the podium to talk and answer questions and do a conversation with all of us. So thank you.
Check, 1, 2. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm very honored and happy to be here in dialogue with André and Claudia. Very sad that Julia is not here, but I'm sure that this book will lead to many future conversations on these topics. Claudia started this project around the time that I started my own dissertation, still to be unfinished. So I'm excited that, with the birth of your book, maybe it will lead to the birth of my own project. That's the plan. So I'm sharing a couple of excerpts here from my own work, but in general, this is more of a reflection on, my response to the book and the wonderful kind of provocations it brings to the fore. So my talk is entitled Mulatas, Muletas, Avatars, and Hackers. In Annabella Geiger's 1976 video work, Mapas Elementares 3, Elementary Maps 3, the artist draws a sequence of images and related words that detail a concise history of Latin American racial politics. The drawings transition from a figa, amuleto, or amulet, to an amorphous female form, amulata, mulata, to a crutch, muleta in Portuguese, to a map of Latin America, abbreviated to AM Latina. For those unfamiliar, I'm going to oversimplify here by a lot. The figa, now a commonplace charm in Brazilian culture, proliferated from its initial adoption by enslaved Africans and ultimately within Afro-Brazilian spiritual practices. The mulata, a now contested derogatory term, is a fetishized symbol of the sexual encounter, forced, coerced, or consensual between African and European descendants and the larger national project of racial whitening, what we term branqueamento. A verbal footnote that there's a crucial distinction between rape and sex, and both are evoked here. But for the purposes of this talk, we'll think about what this term has come to mean symbolically. In the deliberate sequencing of images, Geiger illustrates the dependence of Latin American identity on the reinforced tactics of miscegenation. For Elena Strautenberg, the aesthetic and symbolic slippages between these terms, paired with the popular bolero Virgen Negra, Black Virgin, emphasize the foundational importance placed on Black female subjectivity. At the same time, this very social, political, and cultural dependency embedded into complex systems of racial hierarchization is subsumed into the corpus of the national identity and the nation state, and more broadly, the governing logic of an entire region. If the common claim is that women do not experience the gender problem in the Brazilian art historical sphere, the more appropriate addendum would be to state what is thoroughly obvious but often left out. Cis white women of a certain class do not experience this problem. Indeed, as Calirman reminds us, figures like Tacilda Amaral emerge as early examples of the foundational role white women played in Brazilian modernist and postmodernist practices, the latter a term employed by figures like Mário Pedrosa as early as 1966. Thus, in the Brazilian context, Linda Nochlund's query, "Why have there been no great women artists?" might better translate as, Why have there been no great non-white cultural producers? For the purposes of this short presentation, I invite us to acknowledge, with a few brief examples, what exists beyond the frame of the Brazilian canon and the mythos of singular artistic achievement. Scholars like Maria Castro have provided necessary interventions into our understanding of Tarsila a Negra, an iconic symbol of Brazilian modernist art. Its modernist innovation is largely attributed to the exaggerated distortion of a black woman's facial and physical features. The painting subject was said to be sourced from an undated photograph of an unnamed worker, more specifically a wet nurse, on her father's coffee plantation, a site once dependent on enslaved labor. Castro situates the work within broader racial discourses of 1920s Brazil and Paris, where Tarsila was residing, as well as the racial archetypes of the black mother, entrenched since the era of enslavement. My own dissertation project has sought to nuance the analytical framework of these now canonical figures. I claim that to put pressure on the benign reading of artists such as Hélio Tissika, Lígia Pape, and Annabella Geiger is not an ahistorical project that confines those artists to new social frameworks or discourses, but rather a necessary intervention that enriches our understanding of the broader, non-hegemonic social context under which their production occurred. My work exists alongside other contemporary scholars who are expanding our analysis of 1960s and 1970s artistic production, among them Gillian Sneed and Adrian Anagnost. The additive neoliberal approach of now including the contemporary production of non-white, non-wealthy cultural producers easily forgoes addressing the racial and class power dynamics of the production of women artists in the 1960s and 70s. My primary interest is not in a juridical assessment of past artistic production, but rather how this production has been historicized and evaluated, both in its time and in the present. Here I briefly discuss 4 historical examples before concluding with reflections of our contemporary moment. 1. I'm going to take a sip while you absorb this. Antônio Manuel's O Corpo é a Obra, The Body is the Work, 1970, has been celebrated as one of the quintessential examples of Mário Pedrosa's experimental exercise of freedom, a phrase that has signaled a crucial shift in artistic practices from object-specific to participatory actions, multisensorial experiences, and environmental activations during the period of Brazil's military dictatorship. And I invite you to read Claudia's first book to learn more about this work. Little plug there. Considered a primary example of artistic interventions in the art institutional sphere, Manuel's performance took place during the 19th National Salon of Modern Art held at the Museu de Arte Moderna do Rio de Janeiro. Presenting himself as the work of art to be assessed, he provided his own measurements as the work's dimensions, leaving the work's valuation field blank. He later revealed that he was not alone in this act of defiance, having been spontaneously joined by Vera Lucia Santos, a black woman who frequently posed as a model at the Escola Nacional de Belas Artes, the National School of Fine Arts. While Santos' participation is documented in several images from the event, she is often written out of the narrative, including by the artist himself. Ironically, Santos, whose income was partially based on her working as a model for artworks, is regularly excluded from interpretations of Manuel's performance, as well as from the object that later came to represent it. Is the experimental exercise of freedom only the terrain of the white artist? And what layers of meaning are foreclosed when we fail to analyze the layered implications of an actual black woman's body presented as a work of art? 2. If this will work. Lígia Pape's Eat Me installation, a work discussed in detail in Calirman's book, is the artist's own institutional intervention at the Museu de Arte Moderna. In its second iteration at Manrio, Eat Me a Gula ou a Luxúria, Eat Me Gluttony or Lust, was a large-scale multimedia installation comprised of 2 film works and a multifunctional exhibition space. The Manrio presentation involved a direct intervention into more traditional exhibition practices. The walls were painted black, and the 3 sections were framed by shimmering draped black plastic curtains, emphasizing the glow of the exhibition's large neon signs. Other areas were illuminated with red lights. Frederico Moraes described the atmosphere as, quote, a mix between motel, club, and cabaret, end quote. The space was filled with various vitrines, one lined with hair and apples, another with all the paraphernalia a woman puts on herself to transform into an object of desire, Papi's words, and a third also lined with hair, alongside pinup photos and feminist texts, also Papi's words. Below each neon sign was a platform filled with groupings of small white paper bags available for purchase. The bags resembled the small popcorn sacks sold by street vendors and were filled with a range of items related to, quote, women as an object of consumption, end quote. They were stamped objetos de sedução, objects of seduction. In lieu of the artist's signature, each was also authenticated by a red lipstick mark adjacent to or across the stamped letters. As ready-mades, the objetos de sedução challenged not only the status of the art object, but the normalized status of its contents as consumer products. Papi thus transformed the space of the museum into a site of alternate economics, simultaneously disrupting the sanctity of the art object by selling parts of the exhibition for one cruzeiro, a sum accessible to a fairly wide range of visitors. A few years after the Monjillo presentation, Papi described the importance of a street sweeper feeling empowered to purchase a work of art, thus shifting his relationship to an ordinarily exclusionary art institutional space. These displays were accompanied by two video works, the more commonly discussed Eat Me from 1975, which I will not discuss here, and a second untitled film to be projected both inside and outside the museum. The film was a looping sequence of a smiling Papi with arm outstretched, beckoning the viewer with her finger. It was shown behind a curtain within the installation and on the museum's external wall facing towards the outside street traffic. Papi described this wall as enormous and as smooth as a motion picture screen. And the film's outdoor projection functioned as a large moving advertisement meant to lure onlookers into the exhibition. Papi sought to mimic the summoning tactics of sex workers who solicited customers in the areas surrounding the museum, at the same time that her visual representation distinguished her from those who typically occupied this profession. Rather than a revealing outfit, Papi wore a long-sleeve light blue velour top, and her shiny gold watch and ring were central focal points as she gestured towards the viewer. Nearly 50 years old at the time the video was made, Papi was equally distinct from the women who appeared in the advertisements she referenced. Nevertheless, the film was suggestive enough to be removed from the outdoor display, with the claim that it was a dangerous distraction for the drivers passing near the museum. Papi thus employs the aesthetics and tactics of clandestine economies of sex work to critique the sexualized role of women in Brazilian society, while indirectly revealing her own distance from such realities. 3. Anabela Geiger, Brasil Nativo, Brasil Indígena. Lígia Papi's Our Parents, Fósiles from 1974 could be described as a filmic version of an audiovisual, the experimental slideshow format furthered by the critic teacher Federico Moraes and others beginning in 1970. The camera cuts between film snippets of static images, commercial postcards of the indigenous communities of Brazil purchased by Papi from newsstands around the city. Many of the images used by Papi and Our Parents come from a series of postcards sold under the name Brasil Nativo, Native Brazil, which became the basis for Anabela Geiger's 1977 photographic project Brasil Nativo, Brasil Alienígena, Native Brazil, Alien Brazil. Like Papi, Geiger recounts seeing these types of postcards routinely sold at newsstands and wanting to disrupt the, quote, paradisiacal images they perpetuated. In the series, Geiger pairs 9 original postcards with her own calculated restaging of the images photographed by Luís Carlos Velho. Geiger's photographs mirror the content of the postcards, recreating each figure's poses, small gestures, and expressions, while translating them to her white, middle-class urban context. Many of these images spotlight the quotidian activities of feminized domesticity. As Karen Stempel notes, Geiger's substitutions often emphasize the distance between her and the subject she mimics. Whereas a Bororó woman must grind grain with a heavy wooden mortar, Geiger feigns a strained expression while holding a large shopping bag of groceries from the market. Geiger's translations often highlight the forced staging of the originals and their appeals to the cliches of the voyeuristic, touristic expectation. Upon second glance, the Bororó woman is merely holding the heavy mortar in an empty vessel. Geiger also restages 3 large group scenes of women, one of which is a postcard of a Yamuri Kumã dance by Soya and Tromai women that also appears in Papi's Our Parents. While Brasil Nativo, Brasil Alienígena has been analyzed and discussed extensively, none have commented on a crucial third term within these images, the presence of a black maternal figure. Appearing on the edge of each of the groupings with a young black child, she troubles the simplistic binary of indigenous, native, and white alien. To contemporaneous viewers of the work, the black woman's presence within this intimate domestic sphere would be more likely attributed to her assumed role as a domestic worker rather than as part of Geiger's social circle. The lack of reference to this third racial term in discussions of Geiger's Brasil Nativo reaffirms the unquestioned degree to which blackness upholds Brazil's racial triad. The large majority of the scholarship on this work still contends that Geiger's Jewish-Polish ancestry allowed her to identify with the marginalized experience of the other. This reading fails to question categories of difference and to acknowledge the differential positions of power inflecting such structures of identification. At the crux of Geiger's project is the desire to trouble the distinctions between self and other and between native and alien. Guy Brett's, I'll say very problematic and read transphobic reading of the work more accurately describes Geiger's performance for the camera as a form of drag, one that troubles categorical bounds by acknowledging one's inability to achieve an authentic simulation. The back of each of Geiger's postcards includes the printed disclaimer, "With my lack of skill as a primitive man." 4. In various examples, meditations on the confinement of domesticity occur against the neutral background of the unnamed labor performed by the anonymous maid. In Eloneda Estudar Mulher Objeto de Cama e Mesa, Woman Object of the Bed and of the Table, among the items featured in Lígia Pape's Eat Me display, female ennui is described within this context as a little girl absorbs the banality of life in the home, a telenovela plotline, or, quote, the maid stealing her mother's lipstick. Letícia Parente, part of a first generation of video artists in Brazil, made a series of video-based works, among them from 1975, Marca Registrada, trademark, from 1975, and Tarefa 1, or Chore 1, 1982, pictured here. In Tarefa 1, Parente places herself prone on an ironing board while a faceless woman dressed in a maid's uniform irons the clothes on Parente's body. Gillian Sneed's research reveals that the unnamed and partially visible woman in this work is Dona Raimunda, last name omitted, Parente's real-life domestic worker. Parente's own son described the work as a tropicalist version of Manet's Olympia, one in which Parente's housekeeper enacts a, quote, retribution for the history of slavery or colonialism, end quote. His analysis oversimplifies, and one might say ahistoricizes, the artist's original intent, as well as the power dynamic that Raimunda finds herself under. Her agency in participating in the work, unfortunately, is hard to assess. Gillian Sneed's Foucauldian read of Parente's video works argues that Parente's performances for the camera deploy confinement and self-harm to comment on gender oppression, while simultaneously alluding to the torture tactics of the Brazilian military dictatorship. Sneed rightfully interprets the work's contradictory nature, revealing white middle-class women's complicity in social hierarchies in their attempts to upend the status quo. As Calirman book asserts, many contemporary artists build on the legacy of Brazilian art history to reflect on both enduring and present-day oppressions of institutional spaces. Theorists such as Fabiola Lopes Duran have examined how discourses in literature, advertising, science, and official government policies in the 1920s and 30s, and later the 1950s and 60s, explicitly aligned modernization efforts with whitening agendas and eugenics models. These early cultural and social frameworks systematically ascribe the separation of the city and access to its resources along racial, class, and gender divisions. It is under this context that dissident artists of the 60s and 70s created their works, and in many ways, these codes still permeate contemporary urban centers in Brazil. In Embodied Avatars, U.S. scholar Yuri McMillan challenges a central role given to white women working in performance, often to the exclusion of their black counterparts. McMillan theorizes the use of avatars, that is, simulated beings, by Black women artists working in performance to subvert cultural and social norms. As Calirman herself argues, Renata Filhina's performances in whiteface subvert the underlying logics of racial whitening, branqueamento, to highlight the structural impact of branquitude, the various ways in which white supremacy and white privilege are enforced within and beyond elite spaces of the city. Filhina's performances function on multiple registers, one being the reversal of a long history of blackface that has permeated and continues to permeate Brazilian culture. Another is the way in which she challenges the neutrality of whiteness. Paraphrasing the psychologist Edith Pisa, Calirman reminds us, quote, "To be white is to attribute identity to others." As a few examples have already shown, playing the other is a common artistic trope across art histories. Whereas Papi makes a half-hearted attempt to mimic a sex worker in her Eat Me project, Liz Paraíso powerfully adopts this persona in her 2016 project, Paraíso Carioca Panfleto, which can be alternately translated as Carioca Paradise Pamphlet or Paraíso Carioca Pamphlet, referencing the real-life survival economies of travestis and trans people in Brazil, while drawing larger parallels to art institutional structures of tokenization and exclusion. When distributing these leaflets at various art events, she has often listed the very address and number of the space in lieu of her own contact information. I will use this opportunity, is it the right slide? Yes, to also amplify the recently released book, Hackeando o Poder, Hacking Power, Guerrilla Tactics for Artists of the Global South, an anthology of texts organized by the artist and curator Pamela Castro, with essays by the Hegemony Collective, alongside some of my favorite contemporary thinkers, and featuring Liz Paraíso on the cover, who's here with us today, and will be speaking with us a little bit later on. Vulcânica Pouca Roupa's essay in this volume reads as a contemporary indictment of Brazilian art systems, or systems, CIS-TEMS, Alan Auckland's 1971 treatise, confronting the lack of travestis, trans people, and non-binary people under the umbrella term pessoas T people in institutional collections, while also questioning the various parameters by which we judge artistic merit and achievement. She challenges the unequal focus on the lived experiences of T people when such pressures have not been placed on those with access to power. And you're going to get some live translation here because I did not have time to transcribe this quote. No one tells cis people, white people, the potency or the power of your work is that you are a rich person, an heir, which is the reality of various artists from our territory. A thought that always occurs to me is only cisgendered whiteness. Will only cisgender whiteness have the right at abstraction, while other groups will always be produced under the framework of violence? Sorry, I can only see half of this. We also want the right at abstraction, and she continues here. The use of the term herdeira in the original Portuguese is important here, as it emphasizes the inheritance of power across time and demands accountability for what Denise Ferreira da Silva refers to as the unpayable debt of our colonial legacies, or more precisely, the colonial racial capital triad under which we still exist. I'll repeat, it is not ahistorical to reference a history of inequity that is still being unwritten and destabilized. In the same anthology, the artist Aline Mota declares, and I'll do a better spin here so I can translate better, to be marginal and hero, a reference here to Hélio Tisica, is less risky for some and can, in fact, be a discourse without great consequences. The conditions of adversity. Não, as adversidades não são condições de criação. Adversities are conditions. Adversidades não são condições de criação iguais para todos. Adversities are not the conditions of creation that are equal to all. Painting a negra doesn't hurt. It is only a drawing of a memory distant from the edge of abstraction. The desire of modernization has always pushed those most vulnerable for even even further to the periphery of our very own existence, to the margin of ourselves. Sorry, that's very rough translating happening there. She reminds us, too, that the work of shifting these paradigms is collective. Therefore, I use this platform to say thank you to all those past, present, and future dissidents, named and unnamed, that have helped challenge power structures within and beyond ourselves. Thank you.
Wow. Amazing. André Lepecki now.
Okay.
Thank you, Vivian. So powerful. Wow.
Preciso. Acho que aqui tá bom. Obrigado. So Remy, I'll stay with the white slide for a moment. Okay. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Boa tarde. It's going to be very hard to follow, Vivian, this wonderful presentation. But it's really a joy to be here, Claudia. Thank you for inviting me. And I think I'll do something a little bit different. Because what I'd like to do is maybe to tell us. Can you hear me okay back there? Okay, I tend to mumble, so if I do, please wake me up. So what I try to do, Claudia, is to do a little bit of a narrative of the experience of a reader reading your book, arriving to it at the first time, which somehow has to do with issues that Vivian brought in your talk, but also has to do with something else that may emerge out of the issues that you brought in your talk as well. Particularly the questions of race, ethnicity, class, and gender. But I'll go slowly, and maybe there will be images, maybe there won't be images. I have to see how things go in this conversation, in this unfolding. Because I felt like one of the things that happens once we start reading the book, and I don't know if that happened to you, Vivian, but it is very clear very early on that the book is a kind of a polyphonic chorus, and you somehow it puts on the task of the reader is actually to try to follow the chorus. And in trying to follow the chorus, actually what you ask us to do is to allow us to start to imagine what would be a narrative possible out of this composite of generations, of different zones of Brazil, actually different traditions within Brazil. So we're going through all of this. And meanwhile, there's also like theorization. And always behind somehow your theoretical approach of the book, there's some kind of formulation around Foucault, right? And it's particularly around the Michel Foucault famous critique of power, in starting to think about power is not something that someone owns and it holds itself within a place, but it's actually a system that is distributed permanently between individuals, categories, classes, all of that, right? So it's a perpetual state of negotiation. But of course, like within this perpetual space of negotiation, there's always those who hold more power than others, nevertheless, right? So we start actually with this incredible image of Palomo, and I know Berna is in the room, so she's right here. So maybe later we can talk about this kind of intervention. So we start with this. We followed a little bit through Brazilian modernism, but soon what happens as we read the book, and especially from someone like me who has been trained in performance studies and is always looking at ways in which performance is actually weaved in the visual arts, all of a sudden what this book starts to slowly unfold, it seems to me, it's a history of performance art in Brazil. And even though it is a history of performance art in Brazil that is full of paintings, it's full of photography, video work, right? Materials and supports that usually would not associate to performance, but the pressure, the performative of the performance pressure in the book is tremendous. And there's a moment specifically which is around, it's on page 128, when the first moment in which the work of Rosana Paulino actually emerges. And at that moment, I stop, and many, many things start to happen, right? Thanks to the book. And I guess I'll make a pause here, and to say that right now, I'd like actually the end, the one to the last slide that you showed, Vivian, with the quote, who has the right to abstraction? Paraphrasing, right? Is abstraction something that's still possible to minoritarian positions, right? And it's funny because in reading this book, I felt like the polyphonic was actually creating a kind of universe in which abstraction and corporeality, or let's say abstraction and the concrete, reveal themselves as a kind of powerful minoritarian force. And I'll try to explain what I mean by this. There's something always, only a very weak epistemology would allow us to think that the last slide, or the one to the last slide in Vivian, no, it's okay, we don't need that, brings the question of abstraction through your reading of minoritarian, particularly black and trans bodies in Brazil, right? The history of black and trans bodies in Brazil, or the known history, or the erasure of that history within the, let's say, normative art history of Brazil, right? And then in the end, it's like someone is asking, do you have the right to that? So, and I say this just because by chance, but only a very weak epistemology would say that this is by chance. On Monday, there was the defense of another wonderful colleague, Adrian Edwards, who's the head of curatorial affairs at the Whitney. And Adrian received her doctoral degree in performance studies, which I'm very proud of. But Adrian is working on the question of black abstraction. She asks exactly the same question, right? And for now, I'm not going to bring that because the artists that she's working are mostly African-American artists, most of them. But in that dissertation, and that was one of my questions for Adrian Edwards, and hopefully there will be a book next to Vivian's book, and we're all going to be able to learn a lot from this too, the conversations that both of you, but one of the words that Adrian Edwards uses in her dissertation is a verb that I didn't know existed in English, which she keeps saying, constellate. I want to constellate. I want, to constellate. I'm like, to constellate? Oh, constellar. So it's a verb like, I want to make a constellation out of this, right? So what does it mean to make a constellation out of something, right? So all of a sudden, okay. So this book is not actually polyphonic. It is constellative, if you can use that word. It is constellating, right? But a constellation appears and emerges as an operation that actually is taking place through this practice that I would say they are dissident, they are feminist. Yes, they are, even if you don't want to claim that banner. But they are minoritarian as well. But they are minoritarian in very specific points. And now I'd like to go to the first email. Oh, I can do that. So constellating. We are constellating with the help of dissident practices, okay? So we have the polyphonic, we have the transgenerational, we have the multiplicity of subjectivities, we have the possibility of thinking art history not as a kind of linear formation, but a perpetual effort toward making constellations with. So this was on Monday, and I'm reading this book as well. And then on Tuesday, and I'm trying to think what I'm going to be able to say about this book that has not been said already by the book. And also, I knew Vivian would be magnificent, and Julia, also. So I'm just like, okay, I have, what am I going to do, right? Except to narrate this experience. But then I get an invitation on WhatsApp, and the invitation is this one? Okay, this one. Thank you. So the invitation is for an exhibition that's going to open 2 days from now in São Paulo to see an exhibition of Iole de Freitas. In São Paulo at Instituto Moreira Salles, I believe. And it's called Image as Presence. And it has a foot. And I would never cross my mind that the Iole de Freitas exhibition will have this kind of image. And also this kind of sentence, image as presence. And that made me stop a little bit and think about the fact that Iole is not really in the book. And I would say Iole is an abstract sculptor. And I was thinking again about the question of abstraction. Who can be abstract? What does that mean, right? But for a performance studies scholar, and particularly someone who's thinking about dance, this poster starts to constellate with this book in the sense that image as presence, the word presence is fundamental to performance studies, the word image as well. But image as presence is the presence of what? Is the presence of the body, right? And again, like the presence of the body, the image of the presence of bodies, bodies as presence and bodies as absence, come back again as a theme of the book. And that's why, in a way, there is a kind of proposition for a history of performance art going on here. But I still could not really articulate what that would be. So then we get to page 128. We get to Rosana Paulino. And I look at this, and all of a sudden I see bodies. And I don't see necessarily performance, even though there is performance always in this work, right? It is the moment in which Paulino talks about how is it that it is very important for her that the technique of stitching is the same one that surgeons use to stitch body parts, right? So she's saying, I'm not interested in doing something pretty. I'm not doing crochet. I'm suturing, right? I'm suturing a history that has been put apart. But in doing that, I'm also suturing a kind of body, right? So I'm like, there is a performance theory going on here, right? There is body, there is embodiment, but again, it has been erased. But in looking at this series of works, this is the Permanência the Permanence of Structures, is 2016. And then we have this one that I find particularly important and beautiful, which is an untitled work of 2016, also the same kind of suturing technique. And that red heart, things of the heart, things of bones, things of skin, right? Things of the pelvis. And I'm like, this is a theory of performance as well. And it is this theory of performance that actually allows me then to start thinking about an artist that is not in the book but could have been in the book, which is Michele Mattiusi. And this is performance, right? And it's like, okay, this is 2016, and this is Michele Mattiusi in 2014 in Fortaleza, doing what she calls experimenting with red in the deluge. So this is experimenting. So look at the title. This is a performance, or a series of performances, or a series of experiments that Musa Mattiusi has been doing. This is another part of the series, in the experiment in red. I think there's an experimentation in red here as well. Experiment in red is something that actually a painter would say. It sounds like a painter's title. Experimento in vermelho, right? It's like, sounds like I don't know, Matisse thing, I don't know, Manet, yeah, right? But it's a different kind of experiment going on. And this experimentation is actually something that goes across bodies, right? It goes across, bodies that are on canvas, bodies that have been erased, as Vivian mentioned, but that are nevertheless always already present in this history. So one of the things that I was thinking that this book could do, right, is to think about how in this polyphonic constellation of works, right, there is a feminist, dissensual, full of problems, but full of a desire to already articulate a different history of art. But it's not a different history of art because it is a history of art that is being produced in Brazil and therefore it has to be different because it is Brazilian, right? Or a different history of art because it's produced under different historical conditions or in a different language, but it's actually a history of art that is producing from within this effort of creating bodies in dissent different concepts that would radically transform the understanding of what art history would be. And I would say that reading your book, there are 4 words that emerge in the book. There are 4 Portuguese words that appear more or less across generations, I think. There's different kinds of, and we can pick up more. But I would say then, reading your book, Claudia, what if we could write a history and a theory of performance that instead of using the word liveness, which is something that performance studies scholars always insist on, liveness, instead of that, we use vivencia, which is the lived experience, right? Which is something that actually you can find in Fanon as well, the lived experience. What does it mean, right? Second, instead of going to the Lippard notion of dematerialization of the artwork, to follow Lygia Clark and say it doesn't matter to dematerialize. What matters is to incorporate the object and the subject in such a way that there is a completely kind of thing that is no longer a person, no longer an object, no longer an artwork, is something else, which is a vivencia, once again. So instead of dematerialization of the art object, incorporation of the art object into incorporation of the art object, right? Total incorporation. The third one would be, instead of the ephemeral, the precarious, right? And the other one, and this comes directly from Paulino, and this is one of her words. She uses this expression because she says, I do my sutures because I'm thinking in the social fabric, o tecido social. So what if we think instead of public, we start thinking about social fabric? What does it mean to be in a space of social fabrication permanently and creating this kind of relations that are violent, that acknowledge the violence, right? And nevertheless, and because of that, make any gesture that happens on a canvas or in video always already some kind of corporeal performance, right? So I feel like as we read this book, all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is what's going on here. It's a theory of performance. It's a theory of corporeality that is emerging out of this history, this very horrible, violent history of Brazil. Your first book talks about it. This one goes deeper. But at the same time, with the final chapter, right, the one that Vivian also gestured towards the end, there's the insurrection becomes so beautiful at the same time that it is, potente, right? So beautiful as it is powerful, as it is full of potency. And in looking at the last chapter, there's another word that came to me that actually, and I just finished now because I feel I'm babbling. But there's something also that sustains, what is the force that sustains all of this, right? Recently, Davi Kopenawa was here at the Shed, right? And also at Columbia University. And Davi Kopenawa, there was a moment that he said an expression that for me, I grew up in Portugal, I'm Brazilian, but I grew up in Portugal. So Davi Kopenawa talked and brought the question of the genocide of the Yanomami people at this point in Brazil, especially under Bolsonaro. And he said, "A luta continua, the struggle continues." Right? And I was perplexed because "a luta continua," in the voice of a Yanomami shaman, is actually quite extraordinary, because "a luta continua" is an expression that was developed by the Frelimo fighters. The Frelimo is the Frente de Libertação de Moçambique, the guerrilla Front of Liberation of Mozambique in the 1960s, that developed this cry, "a luta continua." Samora Machel is one of the, right? And I was like, okay, so what is going on that we have a Yanomami shaman leader uttering the words in 2023 that were uttered in 1963 by Samora Machel against the Portuguese colonizer, starting the anti-colonial eruption in Mozambique, right? We have that, and it seems to me that the last word, the last chapter, is the continuation of that struggle as well, right? So a luta continua, but in such a beautiful ways and in different terms. And I feel like the book, in a way, ends with that, and it comes to a different kind of Foucault. It's a Foucault that affirms pleasure, right? And I feel like the affirmation of pleasure, and I'll just finish now, would be also like the beginning of a very, very beautiful art history and a very, very beautiful theoretical concept. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you so much, André. I wouldn't be able to write that book, but you have to write it. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say something, because it goes back to what both of you were saying. It took me 10 years to write this book, but I wasn't writing 10 years. It's just that I wanted to start from the 60s, and I could never start. Because so many problems, as Vivian brought up. And I could never start. And then I would go there, and it's like, no. It's just like totally blocked, because the artists said they were not feminists. The artists were not interested in this kind of narrative that, if you read the book, you're going to see what I'm talking about. The artists, was like, no, this is not important. This is not a subject. It wasn't a subject for us, because we were together fighting against the dictatorship, and anything else would be very divisive. So they didn't really want to. So I said, there's no book, because nobody wants to talk about that. So the book started with the 4th chapter. It's like the younger generation. When I met them, it energized me. And that's where I was able to start doing the book. So the book was written 4, 3, 2, 1. And the first chapter was the most difficult for me to write. And it took me a long time to be able to articulate anything about the 60s. And I didn't want to do that, the 60s, but I thought it would be very strange to do a book that starts now. I thought would be no history. It has to be anchored in some kind of history, and that's why I forced myself to start in the 60s. But it was so difficult, because I think the 60s and 70s in Brazil bring so many problems, as Vivian said. I mean, it's only a middle white class generation of artists that took the space, and they were speaking for the other. They were speaking for the blacks and indigenous people and whatever. So, and that's, I think, what changed. At the end, the artists were speaking for themselves. So there was a voice that was articulated, and it was such a relief. But I couldn't write a book just talking about this is all a problem. And it was, I have to problematize it, but also say something positive about that, right? Because otherwise, what is the point of writing a book? So it was really, really difficult. And really, I started the book really writing on when I met this young artist, and they said, yes, we are feminists. Yes, we want to talk about gender issues. We want to talk about things that relate to our lives in terms of gender and race and all the things that came up in Brazil. I think in 2013, that was the year, right, that marked this major change in Brazil. And that was really something like amazing. So just to start the discussion, then of course we're going to I don't want to be discussing just the three of us. We're going to invite the artists and open to the public. But how would you do this? How would you reconcile the 60s and 70s with the art of today? Because there's a rupture, I think. There's an obvious rupture in discourse, in interest, in generation, in everything. And, do we revise the 60s and 70s and just brings the problems, or do we understand that through the 60s and 70s and see what the artists were trying to do then, which is different what they would do now? As you said, you show Annabella Geiger. It's very problematic today, but in the 60s and 70s, nobody was talking about appropriation, right? So how would you do this?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of the issue, this idea that I think there's like a lack of nuance in the historical research. Like, you can look at the historical context of when those works were made and do a deeper dive into the larger framework outside of the context of those artists. And I think there are many, many scholars that are doing that work that I deeply respect and who are part of that dialogue. So it's like this idea of it's now this buzzword in Brazil, cancel culture has now arrived in Brazil, and it's like leveraged all the time anytime you critique anything. And I think there's a way in which you can, talk about the issues, the contradictions within a body of work that doesn't negate its importance. Like, I would not spend 10 years doing this research if I wasn't attracted and inspired and moved by the work. But what frustrates me is the way that the work is analyzed and these erasures that continue to be perpetuated, because once you tell a story, everyone tells the same story the same way. It's like you get this telephone effect, and in fact, there's many layers of that story that aren't being told.
I try to do different, but I'm very afraid of cancel culture. I'm scared.
I mean,
what will come out of it?
You can reincarnate as something else if one is canceled. Many of us have had to do that over and over again. But I think there's also this element to your point, Claudia, that the contemporary estates of many of these artists don't share the political positions of the very artists whose legacies they're meant to preserve.
Right.
And so you have these contradictions of this kind of, not only an erasure that's happening on the scholarship level, but also in the context of these estates that are trying to block access to specific information.
Absolutely.
And that claim, oh, that's not important. I've asked, what is the soundtrack of this work?
Absolutely.
And some people say, oh, it doesn't matter, just some indigenous music, like, who cares? And it's like, we care. Like, that's an important context. And like someone like Lígia Papi was studying indigenous culture with all of the kind of fetishizations that are implicit in that. I think she was deeply interested and doing that kind of study. And then, the analysis of it doesn't actually account for the knowledge that she was carrying as she was making those works.
I totally agree. I think it's very, very difficult to write about these artists because the states of the artists don't allow you to talk about them in terms of race, in terms of class, in terms of gender, their relationship to, social class. They always want to show them in the white lens. And if you go in a different way, you're not allowed to publish images because they control the images. So it's very difficult to, as you're saying, and I had the same problem, to deal with that because they want to see what you're writing and they don't like what you're writing. So it's like...
I'm not convinced that my book will exist, at least not until some people die. Is this being recorded?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question of reconciliation, but I'll just follow up. Like, exactly, it seems to me that in a way the artworks keep working somehow and demanding for discourse, and that's why we need to write these books. And that's why it seems to me that in a way, like, the way in which what I appreciate in Vivian's, like, the mode of reading, your close reading, you're paying attention to that which is present but not acknowledged. It's always been there somehow,
Right.
but somehow, like, all of a sudden, we have a possibility to read in other ways what's already there, right? And I don't think it's about reconciliation at all. I think it's about something else. It's the production of another kind of history that hopefully will be a more just history, to use the word justice, you know, since it was invoked here before.
Yeah. Let's see what will come up, right?
Yeah.
I think I always write, always write, this is my only second book, but things that I think open up discussion to other people to come in and
Yeah.
take it somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So I hope this will do that
Yeah.
this time. I just wanted to say that 4 of the artists are here, so I think it's a good time to bring them to the table. So Renata Filinto is here, and I'm going to show you their work so we can talk about their work. So Remy, can we have chairs for them? Berna Real is here. Berna, if you could come to the table. Greta Safart is here. Greta, if you could come to the table. And I just saw that Liz Paraíso arrived from Paris. So, wow, welcome. I just saw you now. So please come. Yeah. Please come up. And I will show you their works in the PowerPoint. Yeah, Berna and Greta came from Brazil for the opening of the exhibition. Renata is here doing a residency, right, Renata? A postdoctoral degree. And Liz just arrived, right, today?
Yes, yesterday.
Yesterday. So, can I have my PowerPoint? Yeah. Berna, can you please come? Berna is the horse. Everybody wants to know who did the horse, the red horse. Yeah. So I just wanted to show you. I will go quickly so you see their works. Like this. How is it? Where are you? So this is Berna Reale, who is here, and amazing. Many of the works that they mentioned, you can see, are in the book, so read the book. Greta Sarpacci is here. That's Greta. Sorry. Renata Filinto is here. Downstairs, and you should all look at it, and we're going to talk about it. Oh, that's also. I'm sorry. Did I? Oh yeah. Did I go to the beginning?
No.
Huh? How do I go back to? Oh, this is also Renata. No, it's good. And then here, right?
Yeah.
No. How do I continue? Where? What's going here? Oh, that's Berna Reale. So it's another image from Berna. So that's Berna Reale. That is also, you will see many images of her in the show. And Liz Paraíso is here. That's Liz Paraíso. And that's it. So there's so much to talk about, and I hope we can talk about their work. I just, to follow up in this conversation, because I think a lot of this conversation was about erasure, I just wanted to start with Renata, because her work, maybe we can put her work back, her work is really about white privilege, which I think it's so intelligent because it's something that it's talked about, but it's not, we talk a lot about racism, but not specifically about white privilege, because it's almost like neutral to be white. And I think your work goes there in the very ironic way, which is so intelligent for me. And I would like to see if you could talk a little bit about it.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm so happy to stay here in this fantastic exhibition, fantastic book. This work I developed because I tried to go in an exhibition in Brazil with two black friends, and we were walking in the Oscar Freire Street. It's a street with many stores there in São Paulo, and everybody looked to us like we cannot stay there in this place in an afternoon of a Sunday to see an exhibition, to drink a coffee. So I think, I thought at this time, this place is a place just for white people. Nobody say there, but it's just for the white people in São Paulo. And Brazil is very known in the world because the mixed race, because the carnival, because the big black population. But in the reality, actually, is not a place with a racial democracy. So I thought, maybe if I use blonde hair and a white face, as the white people did in the comedy, in the humor, in the shows of television in Brazil, I'm talking about in 2012, is 10 years ago. So at that moment, people watched in television shows with white people using blackface. So I thought I would do the same thing. I would like to see how white people in this place, Oscar Freire Street, will behave themselves, seemed like them, or pretending be like them. Because if you look for the performance art, I'm not trying to cover my skin. My hands and the other parts of my body are in the natural color. So I tried to provoke people in the street, acting like a blonde woman, buying things in the stores. So it was very difficult to do this performance art because everybody looked to me and didn't know if it was something for TV or something for a kind of singer. Asked me in the streets if I was Nicki Minaj. I didn't know Nicki Minaj at this moment, but I have to incorporate a character. So I think that in Brazil you have what Angela Davis talks, that is the race informs class, level class. Because in Brazil it's very difficult to the white people see a black person that is just walking the street and living and having things and working in a position that is not to serve, but is to produce other things and with power to buy, a power to sit in a table in the street and just look in the street, look at the landscape and see what's happening. So I think that this performance I made again in 2020 and in the Men's Gallery in São Paulo too, with my friend Xambu Ivetu, that is an artist from Congo. And I think that even with this many black artists in Brazil nowadays, if we, with a president like Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva that tries to put the question of raciality as a point to reflect in the politician, unfortunately, we don't treat this thing like a thing very serious in Brazil. So we have an expression in Brazil: you have to laugh, to not cry. So I think that this works talk about the racial situation in Brazil in this way. But is a kind to provoke even the system of art, because we have black people, but we have a kind of colorism in the system of art in Brazil. So if you pass as a person very dark skin, complexion, you can be accepted. But if you don't talking about this kind of black people, so if you look at the production today, nowadays, I think that some less artists talking about our racial problem in Brazil. With if you're talking about that, you como posso falar, correr o risco?
You run the risk.
You run the risk. Thank you, Vivian, to be interpreted like a violent person. Even you look for a way to treat this question with intelligence, with sophisticated language, aesthetic. Something I think that is a taboo in Brazil. Thanks so much, Claudia.
Thank you. I'll go in order where they're sitting. Greta, you are the only artist here that comes from this 60s generations or 70s. And I was going to, and you are very a pioneer in what you do. Let me go. How do I go forward? Where's Remy? Obrigada. Super. Yeah. Oh, you think voltar? Yeah, I have to go back to Greta. Greta, and you suffered a lot for being a woman, you say, right?
Yes.
And you were doing works there much more out there, much more before many artists. You were doing performance already, almost naked, which nobody was doing in Brazil at the time. And you suffer a lot personally for that, right? So if you could talk about a little bit, how was it in the 70s to be a woman performance artist?
First of all, I want to say that being your book, this book is a breath of fresh air about this subject, and I'm very happy to be.
Speak a little closer to the mic.
Yes. I say that the book, for me, what you research is like a breath of fresh air on this subject. And I'm back to Brazil now after 40 years, and I must say I was very welcome now with the new generation that you just had, and in a different context. It's like a reconciliation with my country now, and I'm very well received. But in that time, the only thing people could see is like there was beautiful face and everything, and I couldn't take it. I wanted to show what it is beyond that. Maybe they can see that you are something else. And also, I wanted to break with the cliches of beauty, of femininity that the publicity gives, and that it should be that way. I wanted to create my own aesthetics in a different way and show that a woman can be identified by different ways of her own way of being, their own identity and sensuality and everything. So what I did is I took my face and I broke down in a very big distortions like that, and my body as well, that could mean that you can be different ways in different statics, really. I also had to think about, in that time in oppression in Brazil, you couldn't be open completely. So you have to talk about in a subtle way. I take like an example, Goya. That was my example, because he could do the royal family and get over that in a very cynical way, I would say. He'll give this message. And I wanted to be able to talk without being stopped in this way. So I was very subtle also in my work. So it didn't look like what it was. Like I did the cage, where I was dressed in red, breaking the structures of freedom. This talk about everybody in that time. And I felt that it was easier for me in Europe, because in Brazil I was seeing like a beautiful face from a good family. It's a different kind of discrimination, but it is also. And I really, because I love Brazil, resented so much. So when I left, I stayed away for 40 years, where I did a lot of work in America and in England. And I came back now because of the death of my mother. And it was like a reconciliation, a very lucky person to be back with my country and my family. And a new thing with your book as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll go around the table now. Liz, surprise came here. I'm so happy, Liz. Welcome again. Let me put Liz's work. Vivian showed Liz's work. So maybe I'll put the image that Vivian talked about. Liz, how is it for you to make art in Brazil? I know you live in Paris now, but
Yes.
how is it?
I can speak in Portuguese or French.
So she started doing these
forget
pamphlets
anyone translate.
in museums that did not pay
Yes.
artists and galleries, art institutions that didn't pay artists. And these are like pamphlets, prostitution pamphlets.
Porque, de certa maneira, o Brasil tem um lugar que o Ministério da Cultura por 4 anos já existiu, por isso também resolvi ir para a França fazer um mestrado. E eles começaram a querer capitalizar em cima de corpos dissidentes, né?
Who?
Galerias, instituições...
At a certain point it changed, and the institutions wanted to capitalize over dissident bodies. And then Liz went to Paris to do her master's degree.
Partially because of the absolution, the cancellation of the Ministry of Culture, which was a really kind of crucial, during Bolsonaro's regime.
E, de certa maneira, eu queria falar justamente sobre esse lugar de querer usar o meu corpo, a minha imagem, porque era interessante de certa maneira, mas não distribuir capital simbólico e financeiro, que é de extrema importância para que nós continuemos como artistas trabalhando. Então, por exemplo...
It's too much. Wait.
Sorry.
There's no simultaneous translator here. So, what was it? You didn't want to participate in this capitalist systems. That was saying you wanted to work with your body, but you didn't want to be part of that.
Sim. Então, eu fiz esse trabalho, por exemplo, no Museu de São Paulo, quando eu expus na História de Sexualidade.
So she did this work for the Museu de Arte de São Paulo, MASP, when they did the exhibition History of Sexualities.
E, na verdade, mostrei uma série de joias de autodefesa, comecei meu trabalho com esculturas.
She started doing, and we have one downstairs, she started doing this Balic jewelry. And what is that about?
Objects of defense, of self-defense.
Justamente para falar sobre a violência que meu corpo catalisa socialmente como uma transidentidade feminina no Brasil.
So to talk about the violence that she suffers in Brazil, being a trans body in Brazil, that's the violence that you suffer.
Mas o mesmo museu que queria falar sobre isso também criou uma série de violências institucionais, porque estava precarizando meu trabalho, então eu expus as joias, ao mesmo tempo que eu queria criar um debate público sobre violência, eu estava vivendo essa relação de violência. Então eu voltei a fazer performances.
what was it?
Sorry.
Why did it create a space of violence? You're saying that this works create a space of violence?
No, she's saying that at the same time that the museum was showing the work, the institution was performing various kinds of forms of institutional violence by, there's a kind of system in which artists suffer precarity in order to have their work shown and exhibited. And so she wanted to bring attention to that.
E por isso eu fiz esse panfleto. Esse foi o primeiro, na verdade, mas eu fiz 5 panfletos diferentes.
So this was the first of 5 different flyers that you created.
E quando eu sofria tipo de violência institucional, eu colocava o telefone, endereço dessa instituição e distribuía 10 mil na abertura justamente para cobrar esse lugar, né? Meu corpo está presente. Vocês querem falar sobre mim, mas eu estou viva e vou dar uma resposta a essa violência com um ato que é lido como violento.
Yeah. So each time that she suffered this kind of institutional violence, she would copy down the address and the phone number of the institution that had perpetuated this violence and bring those to the opening and distribute over 10,000 flyers that kind of highlights, kind of emphasizes, literalizes this kind of dynamic of exploitation.
We should translate. Can we translate what is in the pamphlet? It's like...
It's in your book.
Yeah, it's in my book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very common, this kind of pamphlets in the 80s. In Rio de Janeiro, the transvestites, people used those ads, sexual ads, but it says brunette, sensual, anal, oral, everything without... como é frescura? Sissiness. Delicious, caring.
Perfect blowjobs.
Perfect blowjobs. The perfect ass, and very sassy, naughty. And then she say, I accept a credit card for 100 reais. So. On the top, it says Lis Paraíso, which is her nom de guerre, right? Lis Paradise, the terrorist whore. Wow. I hope there's no students here.
This is an education. It's part of why I wanted to bring up also the Lija Papi kind of playing with this discourse in a way that feels very artificial in many ways.
This one is esse aqui é para que
André, say in the mic.
Não, just ask.
Gentil Carioca.
Gentil Carioca.
So this is the address of Gentil Carioca.
Of a gallery. It's a gallery in Brazil, a very famous gallery in Brazil.
Acho que é isso. Obrigado.
Thank you. And now we go to the work of Berna Reale. Berna Reale has something very, very interesting, especially for this college. Berna Reale is a forensic expert, as an artist and a forensic expert. She started as an artist, and then to supplement her salary, she decided to enter the Police Academy in Belém. And the other thing that I think is wonderful about this panel is that I don't know if nobody, but it's not only artists from Rio and São Paulo. Berna Reale is from Belém, is from the north of Brazil, from the Amazon region. So also it's something that you wouldn't see that in the 60s and 70s, where the concentration of artists was in Rio and São Paulo, the major cosmopolitan places in Brazil. So I think that's also something important to say. And Berna really addresses all kinds of violence. Berna, if you could talk a little bit about your work.
Liz, thank you, because I don't speak English very well too.
You speak in Portuguese, and we'll try to translate here.
Yes. Bom, eu espero que a mesa me ajude. Vivian, Renata, Lepecki, que eu conheço há 10 anos e tive o prazer de conhecê-lo. She knows Lepecki for 10 years. Fiquei muito feliz que ele continua maravilhoso e lindo.
To see him now.
Inteligente. E prazer.
Very handsome, very intelligent.
Obrigada.
After 10 years.
Obrigada, Cláudia, Vivian, todo o pessoal da mesa, as pessoas que vieram até aqui. Eu não gosto muito de falar sobre o meu trabalho.
I don't like to speak about my work.
Porque eu gosto que ele seja aberto a tantas interpretações.
I like it to be open to interpretations.
Eu queria dizer que a coisa que eu mais gosto de fazer performance é na rua.
She likes what she most like is to do performances in the streets.
Eu acredito que todas essas imagens que estão aí são na rua.
All the images that we're showing here today are in the street, were done in the street.
Porque eu justamente gosto de falar com as pessoas que geralmente não têm o privilégio de estar em salas como essa.
So she likes to talk to people who doesn't have the privilege to speak only in places like this.
E eu gosto também de surpreender a rua e estar preparada para tudo que a rua pode me dar.
She likes to surprise the street and be prepared to everything that the street can give her back.
Não é fácil.
It's not easy.
Porque nós artistas muitas vezes somos arrogantes.
Because we artists many times are arrogant.
Achamos que tudo que a gente faz é bom, bonito e todo mundo tem que ver.
We think that everything we do is good, it's beautiful and everybody should see.
Mas quando você vai para a rua, você também está invadindo o espaço daquelas pessoas.
But when you go to the street, you're also invading the space of those people.
E eles podem gostar ou não. E
and they could like or not.
Isso me dá uma adrenalina.
And that gives me adrenaline.
É como se eu colocasse o meu trabalho o tempo inteiro à prova.
It's like if I'm testing my work all the time.
Obrigada, gente.
So we have time for a few questions if anybody would like to say something or anybody? No? Okay, so there. It's too much to absorb. So maybe among us, André, something.
I just wanted to ask actually Ben about this work.
Can you speak on the mic?
Sorry. I felt like asking Berna about this work because I don't know. I'm curious about ginástica da pele.
The video is downstairs, haha.
Okay,
but she should talk about it.
Ai, obrigada por a pergunta, porque esse trabalho, quando ele foi mostrado,
Thank you for this question because
eu
when
mostrei
I showed
só
this
uma
work,
parte.
I showed only a small part of it.
Eu fui praticamente crucificada.
And I was crucified.
Porque as pessoas só viram a parte onde tinha as pessoas pretas.
Because people only saw the part that were the black people.
E não tinham visto que o trabalho é um degradê na realidade.
They haven't seen that in reality is a degradê. What is in English? Degradê? Degradation of colors. No? No. Not degradê. Degradê. Gradation. Thank you, Claire. Gradation.
E eu tô aí no pior papel, que é o papel do poder, é o papel das pessoas brancas privilegiadas.
I'm there doing the role of the.
No papel da polícia.
She's there doing the role of the police, of the privileged white people who gives the orders.
Que é uma coisa
you see her there? Everybody sees her there? She's right
e é uma coisa que eu vivo diariamente no meu trabalho como perita criminal.
That's what she lives every day as a forensic expert.
De ver que a polícia, a maioria das vezes, só aborda na rua os pretos,
to see that the police only really stop in the streets the black
os
people,
pobres,
the poor,
e os gays tatuados, marginalizados.
They are tattooed, marginalized.
E é isso que fala esse trabalho. Por isso que é ginástica da pele, aonde não sei se tem um vídeo aí, acho que tem um.
And this is what this work is about, and it's called.
Na exposição tem um vídeo aonde eu faço exercício de ficar com a mão para cima, depois com a mão atrás da cabeça,
Wait.
e depois ajoelhados.
She makes exercise in the video where she makes where you tell people to make exercises where they are with their hands behind their head, they are bending, and what else? Arms up. Hands up.
Isso numa sequência
In the sequence,
onde eles correm,
when they run,
param e fazem o exercício
stop, and then they do the exercise
repetidamente.
repeatedly.
Foi o trabalho mais difícil que eu fiz
Was
na
the
minha
most
vida
difficult work she ever did
de artista até agora,
as an artist until today,
porque eu queria que tivesse um recorte de 100
what?
eu queria que tivesse um recorte de 100 pessoas
Oh, she wanted 100 people
para poder você falar de porcentagem.
to talk about percentage. What kind of percentage?
Eram 60% pretos,
60% black,
40% pardos
40% mixed race,
e 20% brancos.
and 20% white.
E esses brancos eram a maioria gays e tatuados.
And the white were also tattooed bodies or gay bodies, so also marginalized.
Eu demorei 2 anos e meio para realizar esse trabalho,
It took her 2 years and a half to make the work
porque eu queria que participassem desse trabalho as pessoas que já tivessem sido abordadas.
because she wanted to have the people who were already stopped or had any experience with the police in their real lives.
E o que mais me emocionou é que quando esse trabalho apareceu a primeira vez nas redes sociais, muitas pessoas criticaram e os meninos foram para as redes sociais me defender.
And when this work show up the first time, she was extremely criticized in social media, but the participants of the performance came in her support.
Porque durante esses 2 anos nós perdemos um dos garotos assassinado.
Because during those 2 years, one of the boys, the men in the video, was assassinated. Okay. No questions so far? Okay. So we are right on time. Everybody is... Yeah? Quer falar, Vivian? No. Quer? Oh, okay. Let's give them time to talk. Marcia. Fala. Remy, can you give her the mic? Wait, need the mic.
It's even worse. Bernard first. They were not prisoners, were they?
No.
No, that's one of the doubts I have.
But Bernard works in prison, women's prison.
No, I know. But I just asked, this was... Oh, Claudia, I'm not good in asking questions. I have so many things in my head, but I think this book was totally a must be done. Absolutely, and you chose the most incredible performers, and is something that is an opening to us in Brazil.
I think a lot of the newer part was a lot of the artists who are here is something that nobody really knew, and this kind of unfolded a new chapter in terms of bringing that to light. Because
Absolutely.
I think the 60s and 70s is something that people already kind of know. The artists are well known, but there's a lot of known names that will come right from this book. And I think
I learn a
really
lot by
important.
reading the book, Many times I go back and forth to things, and I think this is a very, very important book.
Thank you, because there's no other one coming. So that's it.
No, it's true.
Can I clarify, just maybe answer your question? What Berna said is that this work took 2 years to be completed because she had access to the people, the 100 people that she selected. They all had been stopped by the police, and something like the stop and frisk policy that they used to have in New York City. And so after 2 years, she had the head count that she wanted because they had experienced the police,
Harassment.
or whatever they were doing for whatever reason that they had been stopped, harassment or whatever. So I think that's what she was saying.
I have a question for Renata. Actually, I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to focus. The performance you did the intervention you did at Oscar Freire, besides the moment of the intervention, you have pictures of it, or do you have a video of it? Do you have the reaction of the people somehow?
Yes, we have pictures. But I had stuff I keep. Yes, stuff to do this performance, and I gave instructions to the video maker stay with a little distance from me, because I didn't like it to be very evident that was a performance art. And to photographer, I gave the same orientation. And was an afternoon, so I did the performance between midday and almost 6. We spent almost 6 hours, because it was rainy day, so you had to stop and wait to walk. Sometimes went and a coffee and talking about the work, start again. So it was very, how can I say, with many cuts, many interruptions. And yes, we had many reactions, especially of blonde women, because blonde women, because the women look at me and were like saw a kind of a mirror, but a mirror like a ghost or something very shocking, because we as black people saw white people imitate us with imitations all our lives since we used it to be children. So we saw this in white people in Carnival use it lacy like Afro hair, like something very nice. We look for white people using our clothes like a fantasy, like a cloth for the Paris for have fun. We look for white people dancing samba or other, how can I say, traditional culture, like playing, joking with our culture. So I thought this time of the performance, for the first time, some people saw a kind of humor or ironic vision of them. Because the white people não está acostumado, how can I say? Not used to see a mirror of your behavior. So walk like a people very fancy, but a fancy bought by money, bought by cash, not because this person is really elegant, is really sophisticated, was shocking for these women in the street. I think that was the best part of did this work for me, really.
Hi, I just wanted to thank everybody. It was just so amazing. I cut my class to come here to get inspired, and I just really got inspired. So thank you so much, everyone. One thing that I'm curious, because I'm also just coming from a society that is very complex, very multi-layered, full of problems, and full of repression. So, and I'm also like an artist in diaspora. So I'm very, first of all, inspired with the brave and bold works that I see, multi-generational and everything. But I'm also curious to know, like, if any, in the process of your creation or in the process of like you going to even like living somewhere else than Brazil, if self-censorship ever just came in between of you and your work? Although I see like very bold and courageous work, but maybe something that you pause in the process of your work at all?
Diáspora, morando fora do Brasil, se você sente uma alta censura, assim.
Você sentiu isso morando fora?
A censura veio. Não, eu me senti livre fora. Oh, yes, sorry. I felt free when I was outside Brazil. Brazil was very constrained, very discriminated in many ways. So I would come back because of my family, but then I was totally free in another place because I had not this kind of problems.
Can you tell them a little bit about what happened to you?
In Brazil?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I am white. I was beautiful. I came from a Jewish family, and people see me as it was, connected to my important family, and didn't see me as myself, and it was really, really terrible. They always associate me, and I had a lot of discrimination in that time, including from the women, that I don't know why, there was like a machismo in the women. They criticized me more than some men like Zanini or Arthur Barrio, my friend Granato. So I really suffer a lot in Brazil. And I come back because of my family. And then finally I was free like a bird. And I had a fire in the Chelsea Hotel.
She lived in the Chelsea Hotel for a while.
In 1984, where there was a fire starting from my room that burned the whole left side of the hotel. In that time, I was studying Kabbalah, and I went to indigent place to get clothes and everything, and it was incredible because I was born again in New York, like with my friends around. They were Americans, and it was full of adrenaline. And I did a very important work here called Goya Time, La Magia, where I use some pictures of Goya, like the shooting and the witches and everything, to create a script. There was a theater piece where 100 artists participate with me. Some of them were Butch Morris, Sandro Dernini. There was a living theater that participate. And I wrote this script and I directed 100 people because I was full of adrenaline, born again and free. So I did this work in America.
Cancellation can be good, Claudia.
Yeah. I don't want to.
And then I did other works, like My Single Life in New York, where I interview people through ads. I put in 3 newspapers, different newspapers, like the Village Voice, the New York Times, and the Yorker, looking for a man, because in that time there was no internet, and like that. And I interviewed these 100 men, and I let them know I was going to film them and photograph them, and I did the incredible work. And my work always is my life. It's what's happening, and I like, as I'm very obsessive, I developed this work in paintings, in drawings, in performance, in videos, and now in NFT. I'm using NFT. Then I left, I went to London, where I did other works, and that time I managed to do a work where I used a man as an object, like it was me. So this work called Through the Glass Darkly, where my companion at that time was naked, and everybody would see him through a glass door. And it was very interesting work that will come up later. I have many, many works coming out.
Please, what about you in Paris?
Acho que antes de começar a falar sobre minha experiência em Paris como artista e estudante,
What? I started.
Before speaking about my experiences in Paris as a student and an artist.
Eu acho que é importante dizer que o Brasil é o país que mais mata pessoas trans e travestis.
The Brazil is the country that most kill trans people and transvestites.
Travesti, which is a different word than transvestite.
E que consome, a gente está falando, consome pornografia. Então tem uma relação de desejo e violência.
And consume pornography. So there is a relationship between desire and violence.
E eu quero dizer isso porque, justamente, eu acho que antes de ser Liz no Brasil, eu sou uma pessoa trans.
Because before I was Liz in Brazil, I'm a trans person.
E por isso eu comecei a desenvolver um trabalho que era de autodefesa, que era justamente um trabalho que fala sobre essa questão de desejo e violência.
So I started working with a work that is self-defense, that talks about the idea of desire and violence.
E quando eu terminei ano passado meu mestrado na Escola de Belas Artes de Paris.
When I finished, right?
Yeah.
Or started, finished. Her master's degree in the School of Beaux-Arts in Paris.
E uma coisa para mim que foi muito marcante é que eu era vista primeiro como artista e escultor e não como pessoa trans ou racializada.
And there I felt like I was seen first as an artist and a sculptor and not as a gender trans person.
Acho que como artista jovem também eu acompanhei esse lugar do neoliberalismo no Brasil, de tomar conta das pautas, justamente porque não tínhamos história da cultura.
What?
Não.
When you were in Brazil.
O que eu quero dizer, na verdade, é que as pautas identitárias elas começaram também a ser ditas justamente por um lugar de captura disso no lugar do mercado de arte.
Well, what happened is that all this identity politics that started being very important in Brazil started also to be captured by the art market, right?
E eu me via refém de falar sobre a minha identidade de gênero justamente por conta desse debate nesse lugar.
And she felt like a hostage to speak about this place, right? The place of speech as her identity as a trans person, because what?
Eu não acompanhei toda
because of this that was going on, this idea that the market was trying to capitalize on it.
E no meu projeto de mestrado, nos meus estudos de mestrado, eu explorei mais o espaço, estudei arte cinética, fui para outros lugares e não me vi refém justamente de ter minha identidade como pauta dentro do meu trabalho.
So when she was in Paris, she was able to work with kinetic art and other kinds of art, and she didn't feel like she was hostage to be only talking about displays of gender identity. She could talk about others. You could work with other.
Por ter um trabalho autobiográfico, eu acho que o desejo e a violência continuaram ali.
It's still a self-autobiographical work where the desire and violence is still present.
Mas eu me senti à vontade para fazer abstração.
But I felt very free to make abstraction.
E é isso.
Okay, thank you everybody. Yeah, we went back to the abstraction. So everybody's invited to come to the gallery. We'll show you the way there, and we'll have a drink together. Yay!